Welcome to another edition of. I have to pause when I say it because I can't. It doesn't roll off the tongue. Facebook Evilive. There you go. Facebook Evilive. Welcome to another episode of Facebook Evilive, everybody. Woo! So I decided to try something different this week, and I thought, I got such a good response from Tony's band Secret Subway. Tony was the interview last week. So many people messaged me and told me how much they liked hearing that track. I thought, and we were highlighting music that had not been listened to in 40 years. It was like lost to time. I thought, it might be fun to kind of maybe, see if what people submit and like listen to it on the show. But, long time devoted listener, Misfits compadre, Russell brought up a great point, and I do want to keep this about the Misfits 77 to 83. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the Misfits 77 to 83 stuff, and then afterwards we will take a look at the music. And then when I archive this on YouTube, I can leave it up on Facebook and not on YouTube because of the ID tagging stuff, just to be on the safe side. I did get other submissions, but they were not through my email or my inbox, which really annoyed me. So we will not be taking a look at those, just at the ones that were sent via email or inbox. I'm letting the inbox thing slide, although I normally don't check that inbox. So if you're inboxing me stuff and I don't get to it, I just don't check that inbox that often. I find that those inboxes, they pile up, and I get overwhelmed, and I've got so many other, fingers and pies and things going on. And then the time that I have to allot to answer, it's the whole thing. I feel that way with email. I feel that way with Facebook Messenger. It's just, it brings me anxiety. What can I say? So we'll do that afterwards. And I have that all synced up, lined up. We're going to listen to another song from Tony's band. And then we have a few submissions as well. And we're going to just take a listen and maybe a comment or two about the bands and what they're about. They'll be basically blind listens for me because they were just submitted, and I put that up 24 hours ago. I was surprised to get as many as we did in 24 hours, so I wonder what would have happened if I left it up for a week. And if people like this, we can do some more, but it'll happen at the tail end of the show, not at the beginning. Okay, with all that said and done, let us begin. So this week we're on part 3 of Little Fiend. That's Sean Garrison's personal memoir. It's a memoir about his relationship with punk rock and the friendship that he developed with Glenn Danzig. He got to know Glenn pretty well, and Glenn ended up producing his album for Def Jam Records, the debut and only album from King Horse, with the Pusshead artwork. And yeah, it's just very interesting. He's a fantastic writer, although sometimes his sentences he tacks so many thoughts on into the same sentence. It's hard to read them succinctly. So yeah, there's that. But a quick shout out. I don't know if he's listening or not, but I'm gonna shout him out real quick. If I could find it. This guy on the. All right, you know where I could find it? I know where I could find it. Let me take a sip of my coffee first. Dude posted after last week. So we were talking about the Misfits incident in San Francisco last week. And, sometimes I can dismiss, Misfit Central too quickly. As much as I love it, I find that, a lot of the information is outdated or not, could use a little bit of updating. However, it's still an unbelievable resource, especially when you consider that Mark Kennedy took such time and care, loving care, to transcribe all of the fanzine interviews that the Misfits did over the years and put them all in one handy, nifty place. And somebody from on the page, the Lodi page, reminded me, because I read all of those years and years and years ago. It's been years since I've read them. But I completely forgot this was there. Here is an account. Here is an interview and an account of everything that went down, kind of, a little bit. Let me see if I can find it. Hold on. I just want to credit this guy because he was the one who reminded me. I always want to give credit where credit is due. Where is he? Where is he? Where is that guy? Where is that guy? I think he's right here. Fucking hell. He's not there. He's not there. Nope. I'm sorry, guy. Brian. His name's Brian. Brian something. Brian brought this to my attention, and I appreciate it, Brian, but I can't find your goddamn name anywhere. I saw it before. All right. Somebody on the page, Brian, spelt with a Y, B-R-Y, Brian L. something. I forget. Maybe Brian L.P. something. I don't know. Brian reminded me of this, and I reread it, and I was like, whoa, this is such great supplemental material to our deep dive. So before we get into part 3 of Little Fiend, we're going to travel back in time to Flipside number 31 from 1982. Ready, guys? Put on your nerdy Misfits Fiend hats as we discuss and pour over this interview to better illustrate some of the points from last week's episode. If you haven't seen last week's episode, you can catch it archived in its entirety on YouTube. Go to my YouTube channel. Also, if you get a chance, please take a moment and go to my website and click on some of those links. Click on some of those ads because it throws pennies into my AdSense account. It's really nice. Nice thing you could do for me. Okay, let's do it. So, and again, this is also this might be a little hard to read as well because it's the print is so close together. I tried to blow it up a little bit here. I hope I don't lose my place. So maybe I'll just won't look at the camera while I read it. So I can keep track. Okay, ready? The Misfits were interviewed in April by Al, Hud, Paul, and Corey from Flipside. How many fiends are in the Fiend Club? Glenn says, about 100. So that's cool. At the time, in 1982, Glenn claims there's about 100. Was there actually 100? Who knows? But I think it's interesting that, for appearance-wise, I would do the same thing if it was me being asked that question, whether it was actually 100 or not. I would want people to think that it's 100 when they read an interview to let them know that our entity was maybe bigger than it really is. So, and here's the interesting thing about that. So we haven't really discussed what the Fiend Club is. We all know what the Fiend Club is, but what is the Fiend Club? So in 1979, Glenn and Jerry decided that they were going to, and probably, I don't know, who knows what say Bobby or Joey had in the discussion, but they decided that they needed a fan club. And, fan clubs, I think, were popular, but it kind of like, they were popular back in like the 60s and 50s, but I don't really think there were any punk bands that had fan clubs. Maybe the Ramones had a fan club. The Ramones probably did, and who knows, maybe there were some fan clubs. But, you think of, in the same way that Sean talks about how, like, Glenn unironic, he kind of, like, would goof on Glenn for being so into Elvis because to him, Elvis was, just the way that things are ironically cool. Like, people ironically love Nick Cage. Like, they don't actually love Nick Cage for his acting ability. They love him because he's ironically over the top in what he does. I genuinely like Nick Cage and all that he does. I could write essays on the nuances of some of his performances. I don't think there's such a bad thing as a Nicolas Cage performance. My point being is that it's sort of ironically cool to like Nick Cage. And in the same way that Glenn ironically was into Elvis at a time when Elvis was not so cool, even though Glenn genuinely liked Elvis, at least according to Sean in his memoir. And I like to think, or like to make the connection that perhaps fan clubs in the 70s might have had a similar sort of, reputation, in, at least for punk rock, like wouldn't you think, like, when you think of a fan club, you think of like maybe like the Mickey Mouse Club or something. So kind of a silly notion for a punk band to have a fan club. But here's the Misfits kind of subverting this thing that's from, childhood, this innocent childhood thing, and making it their own. And instead of the Friend Club, it is the Fiend Club. That's pretty funny. And it's also genius. We talked before about how We talked before about how the Misfits are kind of like one of the crowning, or are like they're a wonderful example and case study of the American dream of the for an artist, artistic capitalism, in the sense of like, you create some art, you put it out yourself, like complete autonomy in every aspect of what you're doing. The Misfits had complete autonomy. They did the layout to their albums. They printed T-shirts. They had merchandise. They went on tours. They had a Fiend Club. They basically had a newsletter network that they sort of put together themselves to cater to their diehard rabid fan base, which in turn created a demand for merchandise, which in turn causes, Glenn and Jerry to like put out the stuff and couple it with that hardworking, blue collar, Lodi Italian generosity of like, not only are we going to put out this stuff for you, but we're going to give it away for free, except for the T-shirts, which they're about to discuss in a moment in this interview. And it's like, what a brilliant marketing move, like they're basically doing everything that like any good DIY band should be doing, or any good band that's trying to, create a following. Because what is it all about? What makes for a successful band? And I think there are a few factors, and one of them for sure is touring. If you're a band, you should be fucking touring, in the limited experience where I've been surrounded by bands, and I have been surrounded by quite a few bands from time to time, the thing that I've noticed about the most successful ones, the ones that are still going, or the ones that have still such a high demand, they tour constantly. And, that's kind of actually the opposite of what the Misfits did. The Misfits created high demand by not touring, as we discussed last week. But I think this is a little bit different. I think this is more like if you want to be a like working band, trying to break out and create a following, a niche or whatever, you got to keep hitting the same places. You hit a couple places, and then you expand your web, right? Like a spider web, and you keep expanding and expanding and expanding, and hopefully, by kissing babies and shaking hands, as some of the bands I used to know used to say. Those people spread word of mouth to other people, who then bring, more people to the shows. I know I'm a huge No Bunny fan, and I got to tell you, I discovered this band No Bunny, and then I became the proselytizer for No Bunny. Anytime there's a No Bunny show, No Bunny comes to town, I'm there, and not only am I there, but I want people to experience the joy that I experience. So I'm bringing people to these shows. I'm bringing one, two, over the years, I bring more and more people to these shows. And it's like, and it's not to say that I'm making, increasing the amount of people at these shows. The point is just simply that like, it works. If like you make an impact on someone, they're going to keep coming back. And not only are they going to come back, they might come back with more people. And so, sorry, I like went off on, wow, what a crazy tangent that all was. But the point is that the Misfits are just like, they're doing this like, they got their ear to the ground, and they're doing this like peer-to-peer marketing where they're really, people are writing them letters that people write to Glenn, and Glenn's writing them back. But not only is he writing them back, he's like taking like a sleeve of a record and like ripping it in half, and then, writing on the back and making it like a double collector's item. Not only is it a letter from Misfits era Glenn, but it's on like the back of like, a 3 Hits from Hell poster or something. It's like, it makes it even more special. All the bands that seem to be really in touch with their fans write them personal letters too when they send their stuff out. It adds to that connection. And so the Fiend Club is this really special thing where the Misfits are just putting out tons of merchandise. They're putting out tons of stuff. And they're putting it out into ether, these artifacts that would later go for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars. They're just putting out there to promote their band. It's pretty cool. There's a lot more to say about the Fiend Club, but for the sake of this stream and this time, I'm just going to move on. Glenn says, responds, the guys ask, how many Fiends are in the Fiend Club? Glenn says there's about 100. Flipside says, really? What do they get? Glenn says, buttons, free pictures, everything free but the T-shirts. They cost like $5. We're trying to get a poster from the album but Slash is giving us a hard time. It would probably cost $1 or $2 if I could get it for nothing. I'd give it to the Fiend Club for nothing. So anybody who's in the Fiend Club, I believe they even gave out I believe the first Evilive might have even been for free. No, that could be wrong about that. I'm sure it cost something. But yeah, they're just giving out tons of freebies, and they're having problems with Slash, They were going to go with IRS, and they didn't. They went with Slash instead, and it was also a mistake. Then speaking of which, that's why Walk Among Us is not in the box set. Those Walk Among Us mixes are not included in the Misfits box set collection from the 90s because Slash still owned the box set, and Caroline could not get it from them. Flipside asks, how did you get involved with Slash? Glenn responds, I called them up one day to do some advertising, but I found out the magazine had just gone under, and they asked if we had any tapes. I said, yeah. And here's the thing, when he's talking about those tapes, when they're asking if he has any tapes, he's probably talking about the other half of 12 Hits from Hell. So the Misfits recorded an album that was scrapped in 1980, and it features guitar tracks from Glenn, Bobby, and Doyle. Or maybe it's just Bobby and Doyle. In any case, half of those songs were used for the Halloween EP and 3 Hits from Hell, and the rest languished as demos that were probably the tapes that were given to Slash when Slash wanted to put out Walk Among Us for the Misfits. Because originally, I think Glenn had, but here's the thing though, they were also planning to put out their own version of Walk Among Us. There's the Plan 9 version, which has the different mixes. I don't know how those pieces fit in together. If anybody knows or wants to chime in here about that. They asked if we had any tapes. I said, yeah, but we wanted to do it with IRS or one of those labels. But they said, oh, don't do it with IRS. They're scumbags, You know what I mean? And eventually, we ended up doing it with them. They always liked us and reviewed our 45s and interviewed us. Flipside says, and you and Chris D mixed the album. Weren't you supposed to play with Chris D's band, the Flesh Eaters? Chris D had a band called the Flesh Eaters, another punk band out from the West Coast, and they have a song, Eyes Without a Face, on the Return of the Living Dead soundtrack. Glenn says, yeah, but Chris D and the Flesh Eaters are scared of us. Flipside wonders, why is that? Glenn, I don't know. Maybe it's because we're all, and then Glenn makes a mean, scary gesture. So Glenn finishes it with, maybe because we're all, something like that. And then, and they're all HOMOS. I'm not going to say that word out loud. I don't care what they like. I hate them. God, this is an HOMO city around here. Now, the reason why Brian shared this with me is because last week in his part 2 of his memoir, Sean talked about how the Misfits were bashed for being homophobic and, using all sorts of language like the F word and HOMO and stuff like that, and, talking about gay people. And Sean thinks that this was all an act. He thinks and he thinks the Misfits and a bunch of other bands did that to rebel against the dogma coming from one of the biggest punk publications out there at the time, Maximum Rock and Roll, who were trying to slander a bunch of different bands. Go back to the episode for that whole rigmarole. Point is that this interview really is indicative of what Sean was writing, in that, as Sean actually, I think, references this interview particularly, where, he where Glenn and Jerry are putting on this like facade. They're putting on this this whole thing, this falsity about being like these macho sort of like gay bashers. When in reality, Sean doesn't believe that is possible because Glenn and Jerry and whoever was in the band at the time were on the New York punk scene, which was very pansexual, everything sexual. There were gay, straight, bi, whatever flavor of gender there was back then, and that it didn't really make sense. That basically was saying, Sean saying like Glenn and Jerry are more enlightened than they're letting on, and this is all an act. So I think that's key to remember as we read this interview, which really fits in with the material from last week. God, this is an HOMO city around here. Jerry, we try to avoid going down that street, Santa Monica Boulevard near Starwood. Meanwhile, Sean last week is highlighting how Glenn, Jerry, and Doyle and I guess Googie by association are walking around San Francisco, a very gay-friendly city, a bastion of gayness in the most popular way, in the most positive way. I mean. It's a city of gaydom, a city where, for when it was not okay, I'm trying to say this like very matter of factly, while at the same time respectfully, when people are not as enlightened as they are today, there were few cities far between that were enlightened, and or even overwhelmingly embracing of the gay community. And I think New York was one of them, or more so than other places in the country. Chicago, more so than any other place in the country. And huge was San Francisco. And so here you have the Misfits walking around San Francisco in tight black leather. You know what I mean? Like muscle bound, maybe not wearing a shirt under their leather jacket, and they're getting hit on. And so now they're putting up this gay bashing facade that is kind of like phooey, but at the same time might be a byproduct of attracting the gay community, but in the same, or whoever was maybe hitting on them at the time. And so it's just like a big mishmash of cause, effect, reaction, all kind of cringy, kind of like dated. This is all very dated. I'm glad we're more enlightened today. Just saying that right now. So yeah, Jerry says, we try to avoid going down that street, Santa Monica Boulevard near Starwood. Glenn, you go to the supermarket to use the phone and it's, oh, yuck. Fuck you and leave me alone for 5 seconds. In New York, it's not like that. Everybody's into their own trip. No one bugs you. If you're an HOMO, fine. If you are a HOMO and go where HOMOs go, but here it's so fucked up. Everybody's pushing on you. You have a lot more HOMOS here than in New York, which was probably true, but I think that also, there you go. So Glenn's saying in New York, it's not like that. Everybody's into their own trip, meaning that there's less of a propensity. Maybe the fact of the matter is that in a place like San Francisco in 1981, 1982, if you're wearing leather and tight black leather and being all muscle bound and whatnot, you're kind of like sending out signals to people that are attracted to that in that kind of way. Whereas in New York, where there's a lot where, punk has been around a little bit longer and the scene is a lot more, everybody, as Glenn says, everybody's into their own trip. So it's like, it's easier to, exist in that way. It's easier to, you can be muscle bound and, in tight black leather. Again, Sean's words being used here for the context, and not have to worry or not have to deal with being hit on by the wrong gender that you're not attracted to. Flip side. Well, all right. Here's where they all concentrate. And Glenn says, and Frisco is fucking HOMO land. Yeah, we wanted to eat at McDonald's, and the flesh eaters wanted to go into HOMOville. We just said, fuck you, give us our money, and we're getting out of here. And now they get asked about the gig in San Francisco. This is Glenn. So here's the band's POV from 1982, and this is a really great interview. This is a great source. Because if you ask Glenn and Jerry today, you may not get, if you ask Doyle today, you may not get a straight answer in the same way that you would get back then. Here, they're just doing an interview for a fanzine where they're not this legendary mythological, popular punk band that they are 40 years later. They're just, another band on the street, speaking from the top of their head as youngsters. So Glenn says, Melee, Melee. It was an all-out riot. There wasn't enough security. The place went wild. A few kids went down. We had to act as our own security. So Glenn is saying, and I've heard this before. This happened with Randy Blythe, I believe his name is, from Lamb of God. He, I don't know if the kid died or I think he died. What happened was they were playing a gig in Poland Poland. The Lamb of God was playing in Poland, and some kid got on the stage because the security was absent or security was not doing their job. Some kid got on stage, and I think Randy, again, might be totally misquoting this. Anybody wants to correct me, please feel free. Randy picked the guy up and threw him into the crowd, or the kid just threw himself into the crowd. Something happened. The kid cracked his skull, and then, he died from blood hemorrhaging. And there was lawsuits, and, Randy and the band were super broken up about it. Obviously, who wants, any fan to die at your show, right? But what's interesting is that, there is something to be said for the fact that, the band's up there doing a job, playing a show, and it's security's job to keep things cool. Even if it's a rowdy punk show where people are stage diving, it's do your stage dive and leave the stage. It's not attack the band, throw things at the band. And so if there's a security detail that's meant to be a barrier, the security should be doing security. So in the Misfits' minds, they're saying we had to act as our own security, aka we had to get into a fight with the audience. Flip side, what happened with some kid throwing cans at the drummer and your manager went and beat him up? When they say manager, I think they're referring to Rocky, who was, I guess, maybe a tour manager at the time, but really, he's Doyle's older brother and Jerry's younger brother. He's the middle Kayaffa brother, and he's on tour with the band. And he would just, Rocky had been there from the beginning all the way to the end, all the way up to 2003. Where he was the tour manager. He did a lot of stuff with the Reform band, but even back then, I think there were even times where he would fill in, from what I understand, he would even fill in on drums from time to time so that so that Doyle and Jerry could rehearse. Doyle and Jerry needed to rehearse, and they didn't have a drummer, so it'd be like Rocky Bash on the drums. So it's kind of interesting. What's up, Rue? I see Rue has said hello. All right, then it says manager. Really, so Rocky's here. Rocky's being interviewed as well. So this must have happened while they were on tour, this flip side interview. Manager. And it's interesting to think how information would spread back then before the internet. There's no newspapers that are straight up picking this up. This news is spreading via word from mouth, telephone phone calls, and fanzines. Probably this interview, kind of interesting. If let's say you're friends with someone in New York and you live in San Francisco and you're both into punk rock, and you're chatting back and forth, you're talking on the phone, and your friend goes, "Hey man, guess what? I hear that band from New York that you're always telling about is coming out here to San Francisco. They're going to be playing." And your friend's like, "Oh man, they're great. They're the Misfits. You're going to love them and enjoy them." Then this incident happens with the El Kabong, the crazy San Francisco incident. And then the friend from San Francisco calls up his friend because, like I said, nobody's reporting this on the radio. Nobody, how is this information getting around? Your friend calls up the friend in New York and goes, "Oh, my God, you won't believe what happened. The Misfits were here, and they started the blah, 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 blah. And the guitar player cracked a kid over the skull with his guitar, and then, of course, the kid in New York plays telephone and starts going, 'Oh, my God, did you hear what happened with the Misfits in San Francisco?'" And it's that's how stuff spreads, man. And it's so interesting. And that's how the legend and mythology could possibly, or you have a pen pal and you're writing letters, I mean, what other ways are people finding out about these incidents in real time? Again, what's real time? A week, 2 weeks? It's not instantaneous. There's no 24-hour news cycle yet. So manager, a.k.a. Rocky, says, "Googie jumped into the audience and was fighting it out. And some giant guy was fighting it out. Sorry. Googie jumped into the audience and was fighting it out, and some giant guy was fighting it out, and some giant guy grabbed him. So it was either hit him or Googie gets killed, and I wanted the show to go on, so I gave him a shot, and then I ran for my life." So Rocky, and again, I have Rocky telling me the story firsthand on tape for my documentary. So when you see this documentary, They Came from Lodi, God willing, sometime in the future, I will have Rocky on tape telling his version of these events, where he goes even into more graphic detail, slightly. So, yeah, so he sucker punched a giant guy that was going to kill Googie because he wanted the show to continue, and then he ran for his life. Glenn says the show wouldn't go on anyway because people were fighting with each other, a fight here, a fight there. It was just wild, and we got dicked out of our money anyway, so the show was kind of futile. However, as it will say later on, they did try to play again, but they were met to hostility. Flipside asks, what about your horror image? This is great. Glenn. Well, most of what we sing about is everyday things and about survival. Yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, I guess if that's where maybe he's using, I don't know, Glenn. I don't know if I agree with that. But again, like, you're the guy who, like, made this all up. So, like, I guess whatever you say is valid. But one thing I do agree with, the real life stuff he's referring to might be, like, the stuff that's on the Static Age material, you know. Songs like Hollywood Babylon and Bullet and She and Theme for a Jackal and just stuff like that. That is real life attitude. Last Caress, We Are 138. Horror Business, you know. All these songs are taken from things in real life. So maybe that's where he's getting that. He says, like you read in the paper about some guy that kills his wife and hacks her up, and all the details are right there. It's fun. And then you think about, like, the fact that, like, Violent World comes from a magazine. There's a magazine. I don't know if the magazine's called Violent World, but right on the cover, and Bobby Steele had a copy of this magazine. I have pictures of it somewhere. Right on the cover of the magazine is pregnant mothers from Mexico give birth to stillborn monster babies. That's where he got it from. He got it from this issue of this magazine. And I think it was called Violent World. But, you know, the line, one of my least favorite Misfits lines, what is it? Wolverines in dark brown suits, shove them in an oven and they starting to cook. He's talking about, you know, Nazis burning Jews. I don't think he's glorifying it, but he's talking about, like, how the world is a violent place. So I guess that has its place there, but it's kind of, you know, as a Jew myself, I don't really dig. That's not my favorite line to sing. In the same way, I'm not you know, it's funny. One of my favorite Ramones songs is Today Your Love, Tomorrow the World, but those fucking lyrics, man. So, you know, I kind of like change the lyrics when I sing. Not to censor Dee Dee or censor the song, but just because it makes it easier for me to sing that song. What can I say? I don't think the Ramones were Nazis. I don't think the Misfits were Nazis. Although a lot of bands were super into, you know, swastika imagery back then, which is like, you know, Ron Ashton from the Stooges. It's disgusting. It disgusts me. But, like, you know, punk was all about shocking people. You know, when I try to understand it in the context of the motivation of what it was being done for, I get it. Like, obviously none of these people are fascists, but it's kind of funny how punk is also sort of like this anti-fascist thing, and yet all the original punks were, like, totally into, like, swastika shit. I mean, look at Joey Image. He's wearing a fucking swastika shirt. Sid Vicious is wearing I hate, oh God, it's so, like, I hate that. I hate that that's a part of that. It bothers me to no end. So he's talking about that. It's fun. I've been into gore all my life. This is my life. This is me. I'm into gore and horror and shit like that. We're serious about this. A lot of bands do it, but are jokes. And it's true, man. That's the truth, man. Glenn is like, you know, Glenn is who he is. The clothes he's wearing on stage or the clothes he's wearing off stage. There's no, there is no, like, what's it called? There's no bullshit when it comes to that, you know? There's no posing when it comes to that. Maybe more so for Jerry and Doyle, but not for Glenn. And as he would do it, he would keep distilling it, you know? He kept distilling it. First it was like singing about jokey, campy stuff, and then as, you know, the material got more serious with Samhain, and then got uber deadly serious with Danzig, where that dude took himself so seriously that he became the laughing stock of the internet, unfortunately. Joe Vasta, JV Bastard from Darrow Chemical Company and Mr. Monster and those bands, was over for a project that is dead in the water, but involved with a project. He came over one day, and he had these bumper stickers, and he was putting them on stop signs. We went to go put money in the meter, and JV puts this bumper sticker underneath the stop sign. Stop sign says stop, and then he had bumper stickers that said "making fun of Danzig." Stop making fun of Danzig. And I just really appreciated that, because, all of us who are loyal Danzigists, take our, as much as we love and celebrate Glenn, we also are very defensive and protective of Glenn. Some of us are, we understand that Glenn has some sort of handicap where he can't help but take himself seriously, and defend and apologize his kooky, silly behaviors sometimes. But I really like that JV did that, because I just thought it was like, yeah, stop making fun of Danzig, motherfuckers. Some of them are funny. Some of them are really funny. Some of them I'll post on the page, as you'll see. You'll see me post a meme that is irresistible. I try to stay away from them, but some of them are just irresistible. I try to stay away from them because I'm trying to make a documentary, and I just feel like it's not right. I feel like it's a conflict of interest to make fun of Glenn in that way, especially when I appreciate everything that he's done. So the interview ends here. Like, is Skulls from the News? Glenn says, yeah. So Glenn says that the song Skulls comes from the News. All right, sleuths. Russell, if you're out there listening, anybody out there, I challenge you to go out there and find what Skulls is based on. Is there a true crime that Glenn used for the inspiration for Skulls? Demon I Am and Face I Peel, See Skin Turn Inside Out. Gotta have him on my wall, because I want your skull, I need your skull. Hack the heads off little girls and put them on my wall. Rip the heads off I'm probably butchering that. Point is that what killer, was there a killer out there that was ripping the heads off of little girls and had a skull collection on his wall? Glenn's like, I'm going to write a song about skulls. I'm going to write a song about somebody cutting off the heads of, I'm going to write a song about cutting the heads off little girls. I'm going to call it Skulls. Yeah. So Glenn says, yeah, or London Dungeon. I wrote in London because I hate it so much. So it's funny here how he doesn't even mention that he was arrested. This legendary story. Hear the full, detailed version from Joey Image and Bobby Steele in my documentary, They Came from Lodi. The whole debacle behind London Dungeon. A shout out to, oh God, your name begins with an M. He does gore. He's Gore Noir, gore editor. He's from South America. I talked to him about doing some B-roll a long time ago for this project. His art is incredible. He did a comic about London Dungeon incident, and I think he's doing one about the cheeseburger incident right now. And his art is great. Check him out if you know who I'm talking about. Gore something. Somebody post his thing in the comments. That dude is fucking awesome. And then following this, before we go into Little Fiend Part 3, the following is a review of the band's 2 shows on 4/17/82. Okay, so check this out. So this is from Flipside 1982. So this interview was given right around the time, probably while they're on the West Coast, probably right after the San Francisco El Kabong Guitar in the Skull incident has happened. And okay, one of the reviews is the Misfits in San Francisco by a guy named Roger, and that's from April 10th, 1982, and then the Misfits Saccharine Trust and Misfits 100 Flowers at Al's Bar and at the Whiskey A Go-Go are also reviewed. So I'm just going to read through those right now, and then we're going to begin. So first, the show on April 17th, 1982, Misfits Saccharine Trust at the Whiskey. Okay, I really like the Misfits and most of their music, so the stage image is just an added attraction. Besides, these guys thrash and none of that hair or skulls gets in their way. Saccharine Trust was a pleasant surprise opening at the Whiskey. They sounded real good and looked real happy to play. The Misfits sounded better here than at Al's, but that's only because the instruments were more distinguishable. Interesting. At Al's, it was all together in a loud thrash sound. That's an understatement. 100 Flowers opened at Al's and were very intense in their own way. I wish more of the overexcited Misfits fans were here to see them, but they were at the Whiskey seeing the Misfits do a surprise set before the Dickies. Interesting. Very, very interesting. So the Misfits did a surprise set before the Dickies, and it's amazing how they weren't even scheduled to be on the bill, and there were rabid fiends there anyway. So it's like even the Misfits come to the West Coast, and they already have people that are into them. You know, they're already infamous, or they've already been heard of, you know. So even back then, even though they were not popular, and they'll admit in interviews there was only like 50 people at the shows or like whatever, I think the most people the Misfits ever played in front of back then was 1,000 or maybe it was 3,000 people opening for Black Flag. It's on tape. It's on video. It was the biggest show that they did. And so it's good that the Misfits have such a loyal group of fans in LA. Earl, what's his last name? Earl Liberty, who also played bass for the Circle Jerks, and also like he saw the Misfits live, I think at one of these shows, and then hopped in the van with them and came back with them to New Jersey, where he lived at Jerry and Doyle's for like a month or something. Earl from Saccharine Trust and Henry, etc., meaning Henry Rollins and Earl Liberty are big Misfits fans. But I hope they realize that even without the yes men constantly surrounding them, they would have still blown the audience away. So it's a good thing that the Misfits have such a loyal group of fans in LA, Earl from Saccharine Trust and Henry, etc. But I hope they realize that even without the yes men constantly surrounding them, they would have still blown the audience away. These guys were hot, nonstop action. Go see them! Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. Cool. That's cool. So, and then here's the Misfits in San Francisco by Roger on April 10th, 1982. Yikes. Oh, why is this? No, there we go. Okay. The Misfits paced the stage for 45 minutes, adjusting this and that and giving the audience the finger. They seemed extra uptight. Just part of the act, I thought. The singer kicked people off the stage, and they played one song which ended with one of the guitarists smashing his fancy guitar with the skull on the end. Pieces were flying. He then reached back behind his amp and got another one just like it. I decided to leave the area. The singer says, bunch of fucking HOMOS. Can't even move. They played another song which was really great. People were dancing like mad, but when a beer can hit the drummer, he leapt into the audience and started beating someone's ass. During the next song, there was more fighting between the band and the audience. This is music, ? Then the guitarist smashed his guitar over someone's head. I didn't see what happened to the person's head, but the guitar sure was wrecked. And there are pictures. You can see pictures of the guitar, a whole, like the side of it split off. Someone called an ambulance. The Misfits actually tried to get on stage and play again. So even after Doyle cracked someone over the head, the Misfits still tried to play on stage. But as soon as their guitarist appeared, all sorts of full beer cans were flying at him, and a small riot began. We left just as a million cops were pulling up. Maybe it's the way the Misfits comb their hair down in long points in the front of their faces that makes them look cross-eyed and mean. Or bad drugs. It was like a bad movie. We figured someone must have been murdered, but so far I haven't read anything about it in the paper. So, as we've stated previously, I mean, all sorts of rumors were flying around. The dude had his skull split open. Dude was hemorrhaging. Dude died. You know, just lots of stuff, man. That, you know, but you know, the reason why I really like this review by Roger is that it's like such a third party, unbiased. Like, Roger has no agenda. Roger probably doesn't even, you know, Roger is just Roger, man. He's not like, he has no horse in the race. He's not trying to, you know, sell the brand. He's not trying to sell the brand 40 years later. He's not trying to, he doesn't have any reason to revise anything. This is just his perspective at that time, fresh in his mind. So I like how we got to see what Glenn's side of things were, and I like how we got to hear it from an unbiased person. And so this is where, like, these are the interviews. Like, it's these kinds of interviews from guys like maybe Roger that I have in my documentary that I'm going to try and use to tell the story, because I think it's going to present the Misfits story, which we all know very well, in a much, like, different light. It's not all about the validation of this band talking about their history, because frankly, we're going to get it skewed in the same way that Paul McCartney is going to skew anything he says about the Beatles, in the same way that anybody skews anything. If you listen to Mike Love's point of view or Brian Wilson's point of view, you know what I mean? For the Beach Boys. So now we are going to launch. Tell me, has the screen been freezing up a lot? I'm getting a lot of drop frames, which is really frustrating to me. It seems to be rolling through okay, but let me just check one thing before we continue on. Okay, so that was that interview, and now we're going to dive into Little Fiend Part 3, and then after Little Fiend Part 3, we're going to experiment with a new music segment that you will either love or hate. And if you don't like it, you can let me know and say, Jeff, don't do that again. And if you really dig it, if you dig that crazy-ish, we will do it again. More people can send in tracks. Little Fiend Part 3, October 21st, 2015. Before I dive into this third installment, I want to make something perfectly clear. The Misfits are not my favorite band. He says that, but I don't think so. I think the Misfits, maybe he says that now, like as an older man, but at that time, the Misfits were totally that dude's favorite band, I think. Well, he's saying that now. He's saying the Misfits are not my favorite band. I have spent 3 times as much time listening to the Smiths, Queen, The Clash, and Elvis Costello, and I have spent 3 times as... Yeah, he wrote this weird. All right, let's try this one more time. Before I dive into this third installment, I want to make something perfectly clear. The Misfits are not my favorite band. I have spent 3 times as much time listening to the Smiths, Queen, The Clash, and Elvis Costello and the Misfits or Samhain. But he's saying he's listened to those bands more than he's listened to the Misfits or Samhain. But if you like thinking and talking about punk rock all the time, as I did from 1982 to 1987, the Misfits provided an endless supply of amazing, head-scratching, confusing, and hilarious tidbits to obsess over. So there you go, man. Like, literally what this shit is all about. Like, what we do week after fucking week is what this dude's talking about. He listens to all these other different bands, but if you love talking about punk rock, as he did from 1982 to 1987, the Misfits provided an endless supply of amazing, head-scratching, confusing, and hilarious tidbits to obsess over. The lineup changes, the bizarre and amazing first incarnation of the band, cough cool as a triumph, the almost non-stop development of their stage appearance, their complete and absurd devotion to staying in character in each and every situation. So Sean here is now completely contradicting what Glenn is saying in that interview we just listened to. Glenn's saying, this is us. We are not posers. We are like, this is us all the time, 24/7. And Sean is saying that, they're just staying in character 24/7. There is another angle of these guys. This is not them in their entirety. It is, there is more to them than this, which I think is realistic and true. Their complete and absurd devotion to staying in character in each and every situation, the freaky combination of poetry and science fiction, because that is what it is, man. All those songs on Static Age, on all the songs, even though the songs are not rhyming, they are fucking poetry. The freaky combination of poetry and science fiction, the vibrant Americana that they reflected in their open and unashamed worship of TV. Wow. What an insightful statement. That is exactly what they're doing. the vibrant Americana that they reflected in their open and unashamed worship of TV. Look at the song TV Casualty or Static Age. Glenn's combination of uber generosity and grumpiness, right? Uber generosity and something that I think he's kept up to this day. He's uber generous and he's grumpy. The endless search for the unreleased tracks. It was like being into the Beatles because there seemed to be no end to the story. And that's true about the Beatles as well. There's no end to the Beatles story. As much as I'm a fan of the Misfits, I am equally a fan of the Beatles. I love the Beatles. The Beatles were my first fucking band. You know what I mean? And I've read that story a million times in a million different books in the same way that I pour over the Misfits story over and over again. And there's endless things to explore within the Misfits mythology. Why is that? Why are the Misfits something where you can endlessly explore but not say other punk bands? I guess there are a few other punk bands that are like that, but not many. And it's a fascinating criteria to explore. It was like being into the Beatles because there seemed to be no end to the story. That is why a lot of Louisville kids talked about them all the time when there was nothing else to talk about. We were never going to figure it out. We were never going to understand the New Jersey Guido mindset, and we were never going to truly get it. I'm not sure if Guido is an offensive word. If it is, please enlighten me and let me know that I should not be using that word, but I'm going to use it for now. If you were raised... I lost my place. We were never going to understand the New Jersey Guido mindset, and we were never going to truly get it. That was why there may be the most interesting. That is why they may be the most interesting of all American rock bands, right? That's why they're so interesting, because we're never going to truly get it. If you were raised in a Louisville household, these Italian guys for New Jersey were constantly oscillating between extreme hilarity and headache-inducing stupidity that caused horrific exhaustion and aspiration. Since they correctly felt the same way about us, the total lack of incompatibility was the reverse of boring. I can't help but quote South Park's Sheila Broflovsky when she was explaining to the townsfolk about the New Jersey mindset. You can't just tell people from Jersey you don't like them. No matter how obnoxious they are, they will convince themselves that you actually think they're cool. Truer words were never spoken. Louisville punks knew that being cool means being a tiresome idiot, and we liked being idiots because being idiotic is fun. Everyone I have ever met from the Misfits, Samhain, Danzig crowd is simply incapable of not only accepting that they are... I'm sorry. It's like so funny though. Like this is so funny to me. Like he is such a great writer, even though I like cannot read his writing. And maybe it's not his fault. Maybe I just like suck at reading, but that's just so funny. Let me start again. I'm reading from the thing. I personally don't think everybody from New Jersey is an idiot, but this is just funny to hear how he and them thought about this. Ready? You can't just tell people from Jersey that you don't like them. No matter how obnoxious they are, they will convince themselves that you actually think they're cool. Truer words were never spoken. Louisville punks knew that being cool means being a tiresome idiot, and we liked being idiots because being an idiot is fun. Everyone I have ever met from the Misfits, Samhain, Danzig crowd is simply incapable of not only accepting that they are an idiot. Sorry. I'm sorry. It's just funny to me. All right. Everyone I have ever met from the Misfits, Samhain, Danzig crowd is simply incapable of not only accepting that they are an idiot, they are utterly incapable of ever considering it. The only exception is London May, who is not from Jersey and is generally a big sweetie. I don't know, man. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true at all. I know a lot. I know a bunch of these guys too, not all of them. But that has not been my experience, man. Everybody who I've ever met has been really friggin' like awesome and not idiotic, you know. Whatever. In any case, this is Sean's opinion here about these things. So when G-Dog and I started our phone relationship, I love how he uses the word relationship, because that's what it's like. He's writing about an ex-lover when he writes about this shit, you know? It's like, you know, it's like, I mean, I guess it's like, you know, it's hero worship, you know? It's like, he clearly looks up to Glenn, you know? But it's just interesting how he says how we started our phone relationship. So when G-Dog and I started our phone relationship, I can't exactly remember when. I'm going to say that they started it in late 1983, early 1984, because the Misfits were gone. Samhain was just beginning. He says that when they started their phone relationship, a few things became instantly apparent. First, Glenn was always home. You got nothing to do on a Saturday night? Call Glenn. Can't stop trying to figure out what 138 stands for? Call Glenn. This is great. I got to start this over because it's so fucking great. A few things became instantly apparent when he started his phone relationship with Glenn. First, Glenn was always home, probably in his basement, with his things. You got nothing to do on a Saturday night? Call Glenn. Can't stop trying to figure out what 138 stands for? Call Glenn. Want to talk about how awesome wire are for 30 minutes? Call Glenn. Need to tell someone about the gigantic bowel movement you just had? Call Glenny Poo. Need to tell somebody about the gigantic bowel movement you just had? Call Glenny Poo. Can you imagine there was a time where you had Glenn Danzig's mother's and father's home phone number, and that you could just call the fucking house and just like talk to Glenn, and Glenn would just talk to you? It's crazy. I mean, as I've said in previous episodes, this is not the first time that I've heard this. I've heard this from a lot of people that had his number. You could just call him and he would just talk to you. And I've had that, as I said, I've had that experience myself with this guy, Peter Crowley, who is the booker from Access Kansas City. He'll just talk to you. Doesn't know you out of a hole in the wall. Just talk to you. Talk to you about stuff like, you know, music and stuff. It's pretty fucking cool. I think the fucker wasn't home to answer the phone maybe once in all the times I called his house. And I was not the only kid who did this shit. I can think of 5 of us who would call the guy when we were bored, including my pal Kevin Mitchell, whose insane hillbilly accent Glenn loved to listen to. Listening in on the extension when Kevin and Glenn started bickering on the phone was so much fun, I'll never be able to describe it. Glenn with his absurdly funny Fonzie accent and Kevin's voice reaching a crazy high hick squeal as he asked Glenn what Richie Cunningham was really like. That shit was comedy gold. Glenn, what's Richie Cunningham really like? I mean, that's so funny. I mean, and you think about it too, like, you know, in the decade before last, so not in the 2010s, but the decade from 2000 to 2010, Misfits Central was very, very, very was like this online forum. I've talked about it before. It was everybody. We were all on there talking about the Misfits, blah blah blah. But you have to think, and then in the 90s, it was like the Misfits emailing list that Mark Kennedy had started. But in the 80s, it was actually talking with Glenn himself. You know what I'm saying? Like on the phone. That's like kind of like the vibe that I'm getting. Hours of entertainment, just listening in on the line as Glenn would talk to, these kids from Louisville. Sometimes Glenn would space out while on the phone, sort of forgetting you were there. And yet he was too polite to tell you to get lost. Lost. Yes, polite. I remember when SCTV was on, we would both turn on NBC and laugh our asses off while we were watching at the same time. It was like sitting on the couch with the guy. So he would call up Glenn and then sit on his couch, call up Glenn from Louisville, sit on the couch. Glenn's probably in the basement at 49 MacArthur Avenue, and they'd watch SCTV together and just like, laugh at the same time. What I learned from those phone sessions and the visit to his parents' house, so eventually he would visit his Glenn's parents' house, was that the guy was only comfortable in his parents' basement surrounded by his collectibles and keeping company with the TV. Wow. What I learned from the phone sessions and the visit to his parents' house was that the guy was only comfortable in his parents' basement surrounded by his collectibles and keeping company with the TV. Lodi, New Jersey was a tiny town full of assholes where they gave the guy endless shit in the 1970s because of his long hair and then gave him mountains of shit once he cut it all off. This is exactly what my life in PRP was like. I hid in my parents' basement and had no interest in getting a job because a job wasn't going to solve any of my goddamn problems. Could you imagine that for a minute? So everybody's seen the picture of Glenn from high school where he had super long hair, probably because he was into Black Sabbath and whatnot. Everybody's giving you shit for having long hair. So then you finally cut off all the long hair and everybody's giving you shit anyway because you have a fucking devil lock. It's like you can't win. You can't exist. You know? I don't know. I just totally get that. There was no hope in trying to get along with the people on the surface of the earth because all you heard out of their fucking mouths was about how weird you were. To this day, I have feelings of sympathy for Glenn's plight, because it's basically my plight. Don't even get me started on the short guy angle because, like being black or a female, if you haven't experienced it, you have no idea what the fuck you are talking about. That's interesting. I think I spoke at the very beginning about that, asked that thing in particular. I think it was Tesco V of the Meatmen who told me when Maurice was playing with Samhain in Dearborn, Michigan, that right after the Misfits broke up, Glenn's longtime girlfriend dumped him abruptly without warning, but I have no idea if I am correct about this. I know it was somebody who had known him for a long time who told me that, but I can't really remember it clearly. So Maurice, before he had King Horse, Sean, who's writing this memoir, he had a hardcore band named Maurice, and they did a whole string of tour dates with Samhain. So right after the Misfits broke up, so did Glenn break up with his longtime girlfriend, and he thinks it was Tesco V who might have told him, but he's not sure. He doesn't remember. Tesco V is Tesco V of the Meatmen, and also one half of Touch and Go Records, as I recall, and he's from Ohio, Toledo, Ohio originally, and he was very, very close with Glenn for a spell. I know it was somebody who had known him for a long time who told me that, but I can't remember it clearly. Another unremembered person told me that she was involved with his T-shirt business and helped him silk screen and ship stuff out, and that this breakup was what was responsible for the massive shift in his general attitude. So interesting. So part of, Glenn had a T-shirt business on the side, and I've spoken about it a little bit, but when he, in 1979, when I think he really got serious about it, he was selling shirts. He had shirts that were selling in like punk boutique shops like Natasha's and I think even Manic Panic in New York City, and obviously through mail order through the Fiend Club. And that's how he was earning money. He was subsiding off of that, as well as living rent-free in his parents' house. But he had a whole operation going on. And it wasn't just Misfits and Samhain shirts. It was a variety of shirts. And I have a couple. I've shown them. Go to episode 2 for a whole explanation on how Glenn and later Erie would make those shirts and what they would do and yada, yada, yada. I'm not going to go into it here. So the girlfriend helped with this business, and so when they broke up, the breakup is what was responsible for the massive shift in Glenn's general attitude. I do remember Tesco saying, "This is not the same guy I knew. He wasn't bitter and rude before." I don't know if any of this is true or not, but I didn't just pull that story out of my ass. As for the rumors of old G-Dog swinging both ways, I will only say that I never saw him hit on a female in all the time I spent with him, and once when an outrageously handsome skinhead guy was close talking Glenn, not only was G-Dog not even getting remotely aggravated, he was blushing like 99 red love balloons. The truth is that the hunching side of life is something we only discussed twice, and both exchanges lasted 10 seconds and were about my sexual habits. What? Okay, let's rewind here. Again, as a disclaimer here, this is a memoir from Sean Garrison that I am reading from. I'm going to read it, but none of these are my opinions or anybody's opinions but Sean's. So, as for the rumors of old G-Dog swinging both ways, I will only say that I never saw him hit on a female in all the time I spent with him. And once when an outrageously handsome skinhead guy was close talking Glenn, not only was G-Dog not getting even remotely aggravated, he was blushing like 99 red love balloons. The truth is that the hunching side of life is something we only discussed twice, and both exchanges lasted 10 seconds and were about my sexual habits. I don't fucking care about what gives the guy a boner anymore than what gives Ian MacKay a boner, or what gets Lady Gaga's nipples hard. Let me take that sentence again. I don't fucking care about what gives the guy a boner any more than what gives Ian MacKay a boner, or what gives Lady Gaga's Lady Gaga's nipples hard. I only care about people who can sing their balls off and who get really carried away with their own personal weirdness, because that's all they really have. That side of life has always been something I am uncomfortable with, and until I was married, I considered it an unfortunate aggravation that usually interrupted my plans and almost always made me look like a fool. But enough about me. So I guess he's talking about being involved in relationships. Always interrupted his plans and almost always made him look like a fool. And that's Sean talking about himself. And yeah. So, like I said before, Glenn's generosity to me was pretty goddamn astounding. When Samhain first started playing shows, old G-Dog was, as I suspected, still sitting on a surprising amount of Misfits stuff, and he just wanted to put all of it behind him. I would send him stolen animal skulls and collectible toys from our attic, and the guy would send me stuff that would now bring a king's ransom. That's amazing. So you could trade in those days. You know what it sounds like? It sounds like something out of the Lorax. You know, three. You know, when he goes to the Onceler, he wants to hear the story about the Lorax, and he's like, 3 tin pennies and the shell of an old grandfather snail. It's like, send Glenn Danzig some skulls and some collectible toys, and he'll send you stuff that's worth a king's ransom in Misfits stuff. A short list of the stuff he sent me in 1985. Ready? One of the gloves he wore on the cover of Walk Among Us, a mint condition bullet promotional poster, a copy of Beware the Misfits, still in shrink wrap, mint copies of Horror Business and Night of the Living Dead, rare Misfits buttons, a mint copy of Cough Cool, and other stuff I can't remember. After Maurice broke up, I was so disgusted by my experiences with the Samhain guys. After Maurice broke up, I was so disgusted by my experiences with the Samhain guys that I gave all of that stuff to my then girlfriend, who liked the Misfits way better than she ever liked me. Being a total fucking idiot, she didn't lock her locker at U of L's gym, and her leather jacket was stolen. Huh? Glenn's glove was in one of the pockets, and I was both insanely pissed off and delighted by this development because I was sick to death of the Misfits, Samhain, and her. So she lost one of the gloves because it was in a leather jacket that she had that was in her gym locker, and it was stolen. So he was pissed off and delighted. However, Glenn and I were still on friendly terms at the time. This girl and I went to visit him in Lodi with her other friend Nathan Hodge at some point, and he laid even more Misfit stuff on her. And I'm getting to that. I apologize about not being able to keep the timeline straight because this was a long time ago and I'm getting old and I can't remember jack shit. I also have a lot of protein buildup in my brain from being hit in the head with sticks tens of thousands of times. Sue me. It is kind of amazing that this dude is like, he's like putting this all down on paper, the proverbial paper now. And I'm kind of glad because it's like, it's an interesting perspective and it's being preserved the way it should be preserved, you know? Okay. My first FaceTime with G-Dog was in Bloomington, Indiana at the first Samhain show that was in this area. I can't remember who drove, but Stevie D, Will Oldham, and Britt Walford were with me, and the show was fucking great. When they busted into Die Die My Darling, we went absolutely apeshit. I remember grabbing Erie by his collarbone during All Hell and shaking the fucking shit out of him. They were just like any other guys from the hardcore scene in that only time they seemed to be happy was if the crowd was going totally fucking bonkers. But after the show, they were back to being bitter, bored, and behaving as if anything and everything were a huge imposition on them and that they were dying from some sort of disease that made them a total fucking drag to deal with. I didn't give two fucks about that. I walked right up to Glenn, introduced myself, and started giving him the Louisville treatment. Cool. So they were just like any of the other guys from the hardcore scene in that the only time they seemed happy, right. So, I mean, it speaks to this idea that, you know, Glenn talks about much later and that I've heard from other musicians where it's like, you know, you're on tour, you're out there in the world, you're on tour, and for 23 hours out of the day is all about getting to the next show or just leaving the next show and surviving and taking care of yourself and yada, 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 and blah, 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 blah. And then for that 1 hour, you remember why you're doing all that other shit. You know what I'm saying? Like for that 1 hour, that 1 hour makes the other 23 hours worth it because... And I guess I can kind of speak to this a little bit. I've toured with a band one time. And the funny thing is, and this is what I've noticed in general about people and about bands, and something that everyone should remember when they go to see their favorite band live or want to meet the musician that they've been listening to for some time. You know, when you see someone, think about someone that you've known for years and how many times you've seen them over the years, right? So let's say that you see someone once a week for 10 years, right? You see them once a week for 10 years, but you see them an hour out of that one time. You see them an hour out of that day. So 52 times 10, 520 times 520 hours spread out over 10 years. Maybe that's a bad example because let's do the math on that. 524 hours divided by 24 hours is 21 point. So out of 10 years, you've spent roughly 21 days and 6 hours with that person out of 10 years. Think about how distilled that is, right? Now, when you're on tour with someone, you're not seeing them for that. And here's the other thing about that 1 hour. They are at their best for that 1 hour. They're seeing you and they are firing on all cylinders socially, with their mood, the temperament of their mood. Like everything is perfect. You know, they can be their best selves for that 1 hour, you know. But what are they like those other 23 hours out of the day? And when you're on tour with someone, you know, you can maybe only see someone once for 2 months and tour with them like for 2 months and then never see them again. But you know them, you know, if you've been with them for 2 months, that's like knowing them for 10 years. If you saw them 1 hour, for 1 hour per week for 10 years straight, you know what I'm saying? It's roughly the same. As a matter of fact, it's twice as long. Sorry if that didn't make any sense. My point is that like when you see someone for 24 hours and you're traveling with them and you're in close proximity, you know, that's how bands break up, man. That's how like people get on each other's nerves because you're not only seeing them for that 1 hour where they're absolutely at their best, you're seeing them on that other hour, the reverse of that 1 hour, that maybe it's like 12 hours later from that 1 hour. You're seeing them also at their worst. You're seeing every moment of their day. You're not just seeing them when their light switch is flipped on. You're seeing them all the ugliness. You're seeing every in-between mood. You're seeing everything. And it can make life really difficult, and it can be really difficult to be around. And then imagine that's just for one person. Now imagine you're around 5 or 6 or 7 people that you're traveling with you're seeing those sides of them 24 hours a day. And you wonder how any band stays together for like 30 years or 40 years, constantly. And so I think there's something to be said that, like, sometimes you go to see your favorite band, and you don't get them at that 1 hour out of the 23 hours where they're perfect selves. You get them at one of the in-between moods where you're like, oh, I want to take a picture. I want to ask you 1,000 questions. And they just don't have the fucking bandwidth, man. They don't have the bandwidth. They're fucking tired. They're fighting with their girlfriend. They didn't get paid last night. They're hungry. They're angry. They're lonely. They're whatever. There's like 1,001 problems. Someone's sick in the family, and they're super far away. They haven't spoken to their kids. It's like there's so many reasons why someone might act. So it's like it doesn't necessarily mean that someone's a dick. It just means they're not firing on all cylinders for that 1 hour where they're like the magic. And maybe it's not 1 hour.Maybe it's like 3 hours where like you're your perfect self, or where you're that perfect sociable self. I don't know what it is for me personally, like how much time where like I'm like the perfect sociable me. But eventually, at me as anybody else, because I think it's a part of the human condition, is you reach the end of your rope. You reach the end of your rope, and you have very little patience for anyone or anything. And so that's kind of like that's like a more detailed, nuanced version of what Sean is talking about here, about how like, oh, they're on stage, they're doing Die or All Hell, and they're like fucking like having the time of their lives. And then once they're off stage, it's like, oh my God, we're fucking on tour, and like we got to drive to the next city in a van, and life is fucking like really hard right now because we can't, maybe we can't take a shower, or maybe we have to sleep in the van tonight because we didn't make enough money, just like all sorts of shit. So yeah, I think that's interesting. Back to this. I walked right up to Glenn, and this was after the show. I walked right up to Glenn and introduced myself and started to give him the Louisville treatment. He was used to this from our phone conversation, so he was smiling and laughing with us the whole time. We bought the first Samhain record, and I think we bought T-shirts too. He was really nice to us, and we had exactly the type of positive experience that a kid wants when they meet a musician that they admire. I'll never forget, on the same time that I was on tour with a band, we were in Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm supposed to get an interview with a musician. It was that was playing at another venue across the street from where we were playing, and they were it had been prearranged with their management. I'm not going to name the band. You definitely have heard of them. The band that I was supposed to interview, the guy from the band I was supposed to interview. I show up. I rush out as the band that I'm with finishes their set. I got my camera set up. I'm supposed to interview them for this thing. I run across the street. I get backstage. I'm backstage. The handler, manager guy, whatever, points me, says, wait for them. They're literally finishing their last song. He walks up. It's been arranged for me to interview him right after the set. You know what I mean? The dude makes a beeline for the exit. Just a straight beeline, tunnel vision. Keeps walking. I'm rushing to catch up with him because I have a window of time. The band I'm with is breaking down. They're loading up. We got to drive to the next city. I have no time. There's no time. But this was all prearranged. There shouldn't have been an issue, right? So I rushed to. It's like I'm chasing after him. I'm calling him out by name, and he's ignoring me. He's got his back to me. Will not friggin'. And so I'm starting to think, like, what the fuck is going on here? Why isn't this guy turning around for me? And this is a guy whose albums, I've been listening to his music for over 15 years at that point. No, that's an exaggeration. Maybe like 12 years at that point. I had been listening to that guy's music. I was very familiar with the band. I was a fan of the guy. I still love his music, but I was like really turned off by the experience. And I keep calling him out, and he's making a beeline for his bus. And he turns around finally. I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head. And I go, hey man, like, you ready to talk? He's like, I have to go. He's like, I have to go. He's like, I can't. He's like, I can't, or I got to get on the bus, or I'm going to bed. Sorry. Good night. He was just so short with me. And literally, you have to realize that this is like 2 hours later. So like we got the okay 2 hours ago. So at some point in between the 2 hours, unless there was a miscommunication Although I don't understand how that's possible because I had already cleared it. I mean, I'd been with the manager, handler, whoever guy who would let me into the show. You know what I mean? Like, I don't see what, like, I couldn't fathom what had happened. Something had happened, or something was plaguing this guy, or maybe he said yes to people please or whatever. But I was totally snubbed, and I came back empty-handed, and I was so embarrassed, and I was so frustrated, and I was so annoyed. And that was the United States leg of the tour. And then we're in Europe. This is the European part of the tour, and we have a very seasoned tour manager with us who's been a tour manager for a lot of high-profile punk bands, a lot of which you definitely have heard of. Hell, sweetheart of a guy who's no longer with us, by the way, R.I.P. But I'm talking about the story. I'm relating the story and how mad it made me and how upset I am. And he brought me this perspective that I never heard before. And he was just like, dude, he's like, you know, because I expected him to go, oh, what a dick. That guy was so uncalled for, that guy. And he just looked at me and shrugged. A guy who had probably nobody's more seasoned than this guy, who's done every tour under the sun and just knows for 20 years. You know, he just knows his stuff. And he goes, man, you caught the guy on a bad night. He's like, who knows what was going through his head, you know? Maybe he was just having a bad night. And like, I had never considered that. I just assumed that this guy owed me what was promised to me and that he needed to give me what I wanted. And for whatever reason, he decided that he couldn't. He didn't have the bandwidth. He didn't have the capacity or whatever. Maybe he had a beef against the band that I was with. I don't know. It was a weird situation, but this guy, this tour manager, when we were in Europe, he really, really, really made me see it in a new light, in this idea of like, you know, you're getting someone is, and here's the other thing, and maybe it was a faux pas on my part too. It's like, you know, the worst time to approach a musician, the absolute worst time you can ever, apart from the situation I was in where I had a window of time, the worst time you can ever approach a musician is before or after a show. Before the show, because this is their personal time where they're decompressing and they're about to give 150% on stage. They need their space to like get into the mindset to get ready for the performance. And after the show, where they've just given everything on the stage and they're fucking exhausted, give them some fucking time. Give them 30 minutes. Don't try and fucking chase them as soon as they're off the stage for an interview, which was my big mistake. I should have given the guy some breathing room, you know? Maybe if I had knocked on the door, you know, 20 minutes later, which the time that I probably didn't have, I was so dead set on getting that interview that I didn't even consider any of these things. You know, just the sheer fact, you know, people fucking shit on fucking Doyle, or, you know, shit on Glenn Danzig, or shit on whatever. It's like, or on Jerry. It's like, think about that. Jerry, night after night, is fucking performing. Even when he was doing his Jerry Fits thing, night after night, he's fucking performing and performing and performing. And every fucking night he finishes his set and he's signing everything and talking to everybody and taking pictures. Same thing with Doyle, whether he wants to or not. Same thing with Glenn, for the most part, on some level. You know, or a guy like Steve Zing, who I have seen Steve over and over again, a whole slew of times. Not a lot of times, but a slew of times. I've seen him walking around, and people fucking just like, he gets fucking bum rushed. And never, without hesitation, like, always fucking takes a photo, always like down to like and friendly and personable to chat with someone for a few minutes. It's like all these guys, that's what they do. You know, they're so generous. They're so generous with their time. And fans and concert goers, they just don't fucking get it. It's like these people are like living their lives off the stage too. And it's like, who knows what they're fucking thinking about, you know? And so when people like, bemoan like, you know, Doyle said some pretty boneheaded things about the meet and greets that he does. But like at the same time, it's like there's something, you know, and maybe it's his fault for making it like transactional. Because when you make something that's transactional, like, people have an expectation. I paid $50 to meet you. Like, fucking you better fire on all cylinders. I can understand both sides of the argument. In any case, I digress. Back to what I was saying. Rue says gratitude. Tony says Glenn was a big Wire fan. I guess he was. The Wire is a great band, by the way. Yeah, you should have gratitude. You totally should have gratitude, because these are the people that allow you to do what you do by showing up, by supporting you. which is, I suppose, is why they have the temperaments that they have when they do all that stuff, when they're down to take 100 pictures and sign autographs and stuff. But my point is simply this: it's like that these are human beings too, and they just like, it's hard. It's hard when you have to give so much of yourself, and then like you have so little for yourself. You're maybe it's like, oh, it's only it's 23 hours out of the day where you have to yourself, but at the same time, it's like that's not when you're. It's like it requires a lot of energy to like be on. I don't know. In any case, back to this. However, okay, ready? We bought the first Samhain record, and I think we bought T-shirts too. He was really nice to us, and we had exactly the type of positive experience that a kid wants when meeting a musician they admire. However, that was the last time he ever acted like that around me. From then on, he behaved like a pissed off and bored brat who couldn't wait to get to the next comic book store. Back then, I really didn't understand that being away from home and his stuff really, really bothered him. And it was almost impossible for him to be comfortable except when he was doing nerd stuff, looking for books, toys, records, and comics, or talking about TV, movies, comics, toys, and other stuff today that we call fandom. Interesting. Let me take that one more time. From then on, he behaved like a pissed off and bored brat who could not wait to get to the next comic book store. Back then, I didn't understand that being away from home and his stuff really, really bothered him. I mean, he's talked about that in interviews really recently, when he says that he's going to like stop touring with Danzig because he likes to be at home with his projects, or really with his things, with his stuff. Maybe it's worn on him more and more as he's gotten older. But that's, you hear over the years, for the 30 years, that's what Glenn did. He would tour, and he would go to the local book, comic, toy stores and look for stuff and explore stuff. Or talking about TV, movies, comics, toys, and other stuff that we call fandom. Now it's an acceptable hobby enjoyed by millions and populated by mega beautiful cosplay chicks. But back then, guys like Glenn and my brother, they got along famously. We're used to not being able to relate to anyone who is not 100% into that very tiny world, and I definitely was not into that particular type of nerd stuff. So from then on, we just had nothing to talk about. Interesting. Now, and it's true, it's funny as well, because I'm rewatching Family Matters, and I was looking at the idea of what a nerd was. And what a nerd was a guy like Steve Urkel. Steve Urkel is a nerd, right? But today, what kind of person would Steve Urkel be today? He would probably have his own YouTube channel. He probably would be getting tons and tons of girls. He'd probably be, sleeping with all those cosplay girls that Sean was just talking about. He would probably, be an Instagram influencer with all his nerdy ravings and rantings, or, have like a science channel about science. Who knows, man? It's just it's amazing how that culture has changed. Now it's an acceptable hobby enjoyed by millions and populated by mega beautiful cosplay chicks. But back then, guys like Glenn and my brother that got along famously were used to not being able to relate to anyone who was not 100% into that very tiny world. And I definitely was not into that particular type of nerdy stuff. So from then on, we just had nothing to talk about. I would be reading about the 14th century, and he would be totally bummed. If I had been reading a Batman comic or something, he would have been a lot more comfortable, alas. And that concludes Little Fiend Part 3. And that's as far as I've read in the series. So the next time that and you know why that is? Because the next time he wrote about it was 2017. So 2 years passed. And I remember saying, dude, you got to do more. You got to do more. I want to hear more. And I thought that, I thought he had finished the series, and then when I saw that there were 2 more parts, I was like, man, I got to do this about, or I got to do a deep dive on this. And I don't know that maybe there will be even more parts. The last 2 parts were written in 2017, so maybe it's done. Maybe that's the end of Little Fiend, but who knows? Maybe maybe he'll be inclined to write some more. In any case, so now let's move on to the last segment of the show, which is new. It's experimental. I don't know how this is going to work, how this is going to go. We're just going to go for it. We're going to try this out. I thought I've talked about other music besides the Misfits on this show before. I thought it would be like maybe a fun way, maybe people would like appreciate it, or maybe they wouldn't appreciate it, or maybe like, just like a fun way to like sort of highlight other music. And last week there was a very positive response to Tony's band Secret Subway, who have like never been known for 40 years. Like nobody knows anything about them. Just Tony's project from a long time ago. And the song was really great. The song was called Nightmare, and Tony has sent us another song. So I figured, fuck it. Let's listen to that song too. I listened to that one once. The other songs I have not listened to. They were just sent to me. I hadn't had time to listen to them. I don't know if I'm going to be able to hear them live, depending on how I do this this thing. I guess what I can do, actually, maybe I can mute. How would I do that without making a... I guess it doesn't matter at this point because I'll be cropping this part of the show off anyway. Okay. We're going to start off with Tony's song real quick. Let's see if I can find it. Here it is. All right. So this is another song from... So last week we talked to Tony. Tony was around back in the day on the scene. He saw the band 5 times, the Misfits, and he came on. He was the first interview. I thought we were going to have some more interviews, but we don't. I never heard back from those other guys. But I think I'm going to venture out. I have some other people I could possibly talk to, so maybe we will get some more interview stuff. Did you guys appreciate that interview stuff we did? I feel like that was popular. We could do some more of that. So in any case, Tony had a band called Secret Subway with his friends. They wrote a track called Nightmare. It was inspired by the Misfits. I thought it would be appropriate since it had never been heard by the live or by public in any way, shape, or form outside Tony and his friends. I thought it would be interesting to play it on the show. People liked it. Tony gave me another track, so I figured we'd play that. And I put out a little advertisement asking, if they have a band, send me your music. Let's play it. Let's hear what you guys got, And so we'll see how that goes. So I'm going to first play, this is called She Said, and it's Timmy's vocals, or She Said Timmy and then vocals. I don't know. Tony can fill us in on the liner notes since it's his group. So without further ado, we're now in the radio DJ section of the show. Here is She Said by Secret Subway.
So now
quite a good song. I really like this. It really sounds like, the aesthetic really feels like 70s punk rock, which it is, but okay. So that was Tony's. That was from Secret Subway, Tony's band, and that was fun. That was another fun track. I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of it. Tony says he's thinking about putting it out on vinyl. I don't know if there's what kind of demand there is for it, but I got to tell you, so far 2 for 2. I heard 2 tracks, and they both sound pretty solid, and they do have that like sort of, I don't know what it is, man. They sound like, to be honest, they sound almost British. They sound like some British punk band. They sound like an obscure British punk band from the 70s, and yeah, it's just like Rue says, yeah, he digs it and that it's got an old school sound. I agree, Rue. I think that's the perfect way to describe it. So that was a Secret Subway. So now we're going to dive into some new songs. So here is probably the end of the episode if you're watching on YouTube, but not on Facebook. And the reason why is because I asked specifically, and so a lot of people who sent me songs, their material is through CD Baby or TuneCore, which is really frustrating because that stuff gets automatically flagged. And so I just don't want to deal with that on my YouTube channel if I can help it. So we're gonna this episode is concluded right now.